Celebrate the solemnity of the birth of John the Baptist. And notice how it mentions that at his naming, they marveled and wondered what will become of this child. In other words, there were so many miraculous things associated with the birth of John the Baptist. It's also worthwhile noting that when it comes to celebrating the birth or the birthday of the saints, normally we don't celebrate their birthdays. We celebrate the day that they died or the day that they were declared a saint. So usually in regards to their entering into heaven, which is really their birth into eternity. And it's only usually the birth of Jesus and the birth of Mary that we celebrate. St. John the Baptist is an exception for that. So as our Lord points out, he is the greatest of the Old Testament prophets. And even in regards to his birth, for example, Zechariah, his father, is serving in the temple. He has this vision of the angel Gabriel comes to him and announces that, you're going to conceive a child. He doesn't believe it, and so he's struck dumb. So the fact that there's the appearance of the angel. Secondly, Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth are in their extreme old age. And as we heard at the naming, at the circumcision of John the Baptist, the tongue of Zechariah is loosened. And that actually points to the fact that John will be the voice of one crying in the wilderness. So it's emphasized by the fact that his father receives his ability to speak back, and it kind of implies that John's ability to speak will be not just a natural ability, but it will be a divinely inspired word that he proclaims. In other words, he will be very close to God. He will be a great prophet. And, as I mentioned, the people marveled at his birth, and we could say that his birth was truly marvelous. But you see, the reality is that every human birth is also marvelous. And some people, even sometimes the mothers, like they're glad to have given birth. They're glad that their birth pains are over, but sometimes the joy that they experience at seeing their child outside of the womb, it's like overwhelming, because the miracle of a human being is manifest at the birth of a human being. And what is the potential for every human being? So yes, John had all these miraculous things associated with his birth, and he was destined to be truly great, to be the greatest of the Old Testament prophets, to be the one who directly pointed out Christ to others and caused his disciples or encouraged his disciples to follow our Lord. But you see, the reality is that every human being has a future. Every human being has a purpose to play in society, in the plan of God. And we don't know what that purpose is, but every human being has a very important role to play. So not only is the birth of every human being something truly marvelous, but the life of every human being is truly marvelous. And very often when we look at history and we look at great historical figures, we think of people who were like leaders of nations, like prime ministers or presidents or whatever, or great inventors or heroic warriors or who knows what, right? Something that they did during their lifetime. And it's true, we acknowledge these people, we honor these people, and they did do marvelous things in many ways. But you see, what can be more marvelous than becoming a saint? Nothing. So in the Catholic Church, we continue to honor the saints. But imagine even if somebody doesn't become a saint during their lifetime, they make it to heaven. In other words, in heaven, they are totally holy, totally sanctified. They've overcome all their shortcomings. They have, become the way that God calls us to be in heaven, to be full of love for God, to the capacity that they have been able to dispose themselves during their lifetime. And that is the truly greatest accomplishment. But you see, the reality is that we can attain that accomplishment even here and now. In other words, we can become a saint. So yes, it's good to study, it's good to be a great scientist, or even to be a world leader or a leader of a nation, but there's nothing greater than becoming a saint. In other words, the potential for greatness, there's many things that we could say is great, but the greatest thing is to become a saint. And so when we look at the life of John the Baptist, yes, there's all these miraculous occurrences there, but he too had to cooperate with the grace of God. He too faced opposition, persecution. As we know, he was eventually beheaded by King Herod. So too with us, yes, we have our trials, our tribulations, struggles, things pulling us in different directions. But the most important thing is to focus on Christ and to prepare ourselves for Christ, but also, like John the Baptist, to help others to prepare themselves for Christ also. In other words, to bring Christ to others and to bring others to Christ, thereby helping to accomplish the salvation of others.